Millionaire's wife vanished on their honeymoon, the dream that turned into a nightmare. David Holloway woke alone in their luxurious cabin, his confusion quickly spiraling into panic. Her phone sat abandoned on the nightstand, its battery drained, her passport gone. Yet nothing else appeared out of place. It was as if Sarah Lynn had evaporated into thin air, leaving only questions behind. And so began the nightmare. Before we begin, drop a comment below to tell us where you're watching from. If you believe the truth always comes out, like and subscribe. Now sit back and enjoy the story. At 42, David Holloway was the quintessential self-made man, a tech mogul worth $300 million. He had turned lines of code into empires and boardrooms into stages for his charisma. His name was synonymous with success, both in business and beyond. Known for his philanthropy, he donated millions to causes ranging from education reform to environmental conservation. And then there was the Malibu Mansion, a sprawling glass and steel masterpiece perched atop cliffs overlooking the Pacific Ocean, where parties buzzed with celebrities, influencers, and power players. Enter Sarah Lynn, a stark yet captivating contrast to David's larger-than-life persona. At 29, she carried herself with an air of quiet elegance that drew people in like moths to a flame. As an art curator at one of Los Angeles' most prestigious galleries, her eye for beauty extended far beyond paintings. It seemed as though she curated every moment of her life with precision and grace. But beneath her polished exterior lay whispers of mystery, a past she rarely spoke about, a reserve that hinted at depths no one truly understood. Their meeting felt almost cinematic. It happened 6 months ago at a charity auction, a glittering affair filled with champagne flutes and whispered bids. David stood near a Warhol piece, idly scrolling through emails on his phone, when Sarah approached him, not because she recognized his face from magazine covers, but because she wanted to know why he hadn't placed a bid on the artwork. Their conversation started innocently enough, but by the end of the night, they were inseparable. To friends and acquaintances, their whirlwind romance seemed effortless, almost fated. 6 months later, they exchanged vows in an intimate ceremony surrounded by loved ones and bathed in soft candlelight. To the world, they appeared to be the perfect match. David, the bold visionary, and Sarah, the enigmatic muse. They balanced each other, or so it seemed. But not everyone saw it that way. Whispers lingered in corners, hushed voices questioning how well anyone really knew this couple. Some called their relationship a fairy tale. Others dismissed it as too good to be true. A few even wondered aloud what a brilliant woman like Sarah saw in someone whose life seemed so untouchable. Was it love, or was it something else entirely? As the spotlight now turns toward their vanished honeymoon, one thing becomes clear. Beneath the surface of envy and admiration lies a story far more complex and perhaps far darker than anyone could have imagined. What secrets did David and Sarah bring aboard that yacht? And will we ever know the truth? On the morning of day 3, the Mediterranean sun rose gently over the horizon, casting golden light across the deck of the luxurious yacht. It should have been another idyllic day in paradise, but it wasn't. David Holloway says he woke up alone. The sheets beside him were cool to the touch, as though Sarah hadn't been there for hours. He called her name, his voice echoing softly through the cabin, but there was no reply. Her shoes still sat neatly by the door where she'd left them the night before. Yet her phone, her lifeline to the world, was gone, along with her passport. Odd details that gnawed at the edges of calm. Concern quickly turned to panic. The yacht's crew mobilized, scanning the crystalline waters for any sign of Sarah. Had she gone for an early morning swim? That's what David suggested when the authorities arrived. She must have gone for a swim. But something about his explanation didn't sit right. Not with the investigators, and certainly not with the growing crowd of reporters circling like sharks just beyond the yacht's perimeter. The tides may shift and currents may pull, but they don't erase everything. As detectives began piecing together the timeline, inconsistencies emerged. Why would Sarah leave without her shoes, or worse, without telling her new husband? Where could she have gone in open water without alerting anyone on board? And why did some members of the crew claim they saw lights flickering on the lower deck late into the night, a detail David never mentioned? Then came the whispers among those who knew them best. Friends recalled how quiet Sarah had seemed during their engagement party, how sometimes her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Others remembered David's intensity, the way he dominated every room, every conversation, every decision. Was this really the fairy tale everyone believed it to be? Or was there tension beneath the surface, hidden behind closed doors? With each passing hour, the story unraveled further, threads pulling loose to reveal something darker underneath. The media feasted on speculation, painting Sarah as either a victim or a runaway, while dissecting David's every word and gesture under relentless scrutiny. And yet, despite all the questions swirling around them, one truth remained undeniable. Someone, or something, had taken Sarah Lynn from that yacht. But who? And why? For now, only the sea holds the answers. And the sea isn't talking. As the investigation deepened, cracks in the perfect facade began to show. Locals from a nearby marina came forward with unsettling accounts. They claimed to have heard raised voices the night before Sarah vanished. Sharp, heated words carried by the wind over the water. The argument reportedly came from the direction of the yacht, though they couldn't make out specifics. Just the unmistakable tone of anger and frustration cutting through the otherwise peaceful evening. At first, these reports were dismissed as hearsay, gossip fueled by prying ears and sensational headlines. But as more details emerged, it became harder to ignore. What had David and Sarah been arguing about? Was it something trivial, a fleeting disagreement between newlyweds? Or was it deeper, darker, more personal? Detectives revisited the yacht, combing through every inch for clues that might corroborate the locals' claims. In the master suite, they found faint scuffs on the floor, as though furniture had been moved abruptly. A shattered glass in the trash bin bore traces of red wine. But whose hand had clenched it tightly enough to break it? And why hadn't anyone mentioned this earlier? The media latched onto the story with fervor, painting David in an increasingly suspicious light. Headlines shifted from sympathy to accusation. Did the millionaire have a motive? Reporters highlighted his wealth, his power, his controlling demeanor. Friends who once praised their union now offered hesitant recollections. David could be intense, one confided. Another noted how Sarah sometimes seemed uneasy around him, though she always laughed it off as nerves or stress. Even those closest to Sarah struggled to reconcile what they knew, or thought they knew, with the mounting evidence. She'd kept her private life guarded, revealing little even to her closest friends. Had she confided in someone about trouble in paradise? Or had she hidden her fears so well that no one saw this coming? For David, the scrutiny grew unbearable. He pleaded innocence, insisting he loved Sarah more than anything and would never harm her. But his polished charm began to falter under pressure. His answers, once confident and composed, now wavered with hesitation. Every gesture, every word was dissected and analyzed, not just by investigators but by millions watching at home. Suspicion is a heavy burden, especially when you're standing alone in the spotlight. And yet, amidst all the theories and accusations, one question loomed largest of all. If Sarah didn't leave willingly, and if David wasn't responsible, then where did she go? The sea keeps its secrets well, but sooner or later, even the deepest waters must give up what lies beneath. The investigation took a darker turn when authorities discovered that the security footage from the dock near the yacht had been erased. Not malfunctioned, not accidentally overwritten, but deliberately wiped clean. Who would have access to such systems, and why erase it unless there was something or someone they didn't want seen? Then came another chilling discovery. A blood-stained scarf washed ashore miles down the coast. The fabric was unmistakably Sarah's, its distinctive pattern matching a scarf she'd worn in photos just days before her disappearance. It seemed like a breakthrough, until the DNA results came back inconclusive. The traces of blood were too degraded, leaving investigators with more questions than answers. Whose blood was it? Was Sarah injured? Or was this simply another piece of a puzzle designed to mislead? But perhaps the most explosive revelation came not from evidence, but from someone who knew Sarah best, her closest friend. In a tearful interview, she revealed that Sarah had confided in her shortly before the wedding, not directly accusing David, but expressing doubts she couldn't quite articulate. She said he was intense, the friend recounted, her voice trembling, that things felt off sometimes, but she loved him and thought maybe she was overthinking it. The words sent shock waves through the case and through the court of public opinion. Had Sarah ignored warning signs in the rush of romance? Did she marry a man whose charm masked something far more dangerous? Or was this all part of an elaborate narrative being constructed by those desperate to find a villain? For David, the accusations grew louder. Once admired as a philanthropist and tech visionary, he now found himself cast as the prime suspect in his wife's disappearance. His every move was scrutinized, his every word dissected for hidden meaning. Yet despite the mounting pressure, he maintained his innocence, pleading with anyone who would listen. "I don't know where Sarah is. I just want her back." Still, the contradictions piled up. If Sarah left willingly, why hadn't she reached out to anyone since vanishing? If she didn't, then what or who had silenced her? Each new clue only deepened the mystery, pulling investigators and onlookers alike into a labyrinth of uncertainty. Every answer seemed to spawn two more questions. Every lead fizzled into ambiguity. And through it all, the sea remained silent, a vast, indifferent witness to secrets no one could yet unravel. What lies beneath the surface of this story? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain, the truth about Sarah Lynn's disappearance won't stay buried forever. Then, in a discovery that sent shivers through even the most seasoned investigators, Sarah's diary was found tucked away in her luggage. Its pages were filled with musings about art, travel, and fleeting moments of joy. But one line stood out, underlined not once, not twice, but 3 times in bold, deliberate strokes. "He's hiding something. I feel it." The words hung heavy in the air, echoing far beyond the confines of the leather-bound journal. They weren't just a thought, they were a warning, a premonition etched into paper, as if Sarah herself had foreseen the storm gathering on the horizon. Who was he? The answer seemed obvious. David Holloway, the man she'd vowed to spend her life with. But what exactly was he hiding? Was it a secret from his past? A lie he'd told to win her trust? Or something darker still, buried so deep that even Sarah couldn't fully grasp its shape? The media seized on the diary entry like a lifeline, plastering it across every headline and talk show. Pundits debated its significance. Armchair detectives dissected its implications, and conspiracy theories multiplied overnight. Some believed Sarah had uncovered evidence of David's wrongdoing, financial impropriety perhaps, or ties to something more sinister. Others speculated she might have stumbled onto a personal secret, one that threatened to unravel everything they thought they knew about him. For David, the diary became both a dagger and a noose. He claimed ignorance, insisting he'd never seen the journal before, and questioning whether it was even real. "This isn't Sarah," he said during a press conference, his voice strained but resolute. "She wouldn't write something like this without talking to me first." But skepticism lingered. If the diary was authentic, and early forensic analysis suggested it was, then Sarah's doubts cast a long shadow over their seemingly perfect relationship. Had she been planning to leave him? Or had she simply grown uneasy, her instincts screaming louder than her heart could ignore? As the world grappled with these questions, the diary served as a haunting reminder. Sarah Lynn wasn't just a victim. She was a woman who sensed danger closing in. And now her final days were reduced to fragments. A missing phone, a blood-stained scarf, an erased security tape, and those 5 chilling words scrawled in ink. What secrets lie hidden beneath the surface of David Holloway's polished exterior? And what did Sarah discover that may have cost her everything? The answers remain elusive, for now, but the sea holds its secrets tightly, and the truth has a way of surfacing when least expected. As suspicions mounted, investigators turned their attention to David Holloway's history, a past he had carefully curated and rarely discussed. What they uncovered sent shockwaves through the case. 5 years earlier, David's first wife, Evelyn, had died in a car crash ruled accidental at the time. But as detectives revisited the details, cracks began to form in the official narrative. The crash occurred on a quiet country road late at night, with no witnesses and no skid marks to suggest braking. Evelyn was alone in the vehicle, her death attributed to a tragic misstep, an unseen curve, a momentary lapse of attention, or so it seemed. Now, under the harsh light of hindsight, questions arose that couldn't be ignored. Why had David refused to pursue further investigation after her death? Why did friends recall him appearing eerily composed at the funeral, almost detached? And why had Evelyn confided to a close friend just weeks before her death that she felt watched and trapped, though she never elaborated? The parallels between Evelyn's death and Sarah's disappearance were impossible to ignore. Both women vanished under mysterious circumstances. Both left behind unanswered questions. And both were married to a man whose charm and wealth often overshadowed everything else, including doubt. David vehemently denied any connection between the two tragedies. "Evelyn's death broke me," he told investigators, his voice thick with emotion, or was it calculation? To compare her accident to what's happening now is cruel and unfounded. Yet the whispers grew louder. Could David's past hold the key to understanding Sarah's fate? Or was this simply another attempt to paint him as guilty by association? The media frenzy intensified as reporters dug up old photos of Evelyn, beautiful, vibrant, full of life, and contrasted them with images of Sarah, equally radiant but now hauntingly absent. Social media exploded with theories linking the two cases, fueling speculation that David might have a darker side hidden beneath his polished exterior. For those closest to the investigation, one thing became clear. David Holloway's past wasn't as pristine as he'd led everyone to believe. And if there was even a shred of truth to the idea that history repeats itself, then Sarah Lynn's disappearance might not be an isolated incident. It could be part of a pattern. But proving that pattern would require more than conjecture. It would demand evidence strong enough to pierce the veil of privilege and power surrounding David's life. And so the question remains, is David Holloway a grieving husband searching for answers, or a master manipulator hiding behind a mask of grief? Only the shadows of his past know for sure, and shadows, like secrets, have a way of eventually coming into the light. No charges were ever filed in Evelyn's death. At the time, authorities accepted the explanation of a tragic accident, a grim twist of fate on an isolated road. David appeared cooperative during the inquiry, providing statements and alibis that checked out. Without concrete evidence pointing to foul play, the case was closed, leaving behind only unanswered questions and lingering unease among those who knew them. But now, years later, Sarah's sudden disappearance cast a long, dark shadow over that unresolved chapter of David's life. The echoes between the two events were undeniable. A woman gone under mysterious circumstances, a grieving, or perhaps too composed husband at the center, and a trail of doubts that refused to fade with time. The parallels weren't lost on investigators or the public. Social media lit up with side-by-side comparisons of Evelyn and Sarah, their lives seemingly intertwined by tragedy, despite being separated by years. Both women had been intelligent, accomplished, admired. Both had married into luxury and prestige, their unions celebrated as modern fairy tales. And both had met endings steeped in mystery. Was it possible these tragedies were unrelated? That David was simply cursed by unimaginable misfortune? Or was there something more sinister at work, a pattern repeating itself with devastating precision? For Sarah's loved ones, the resemblance to Evelyn's story was unbearable. Her best friend broke down during an interview, clutching Sarah's scarf, the one found washed ashore, as she spoke through tears. "I can't stop thinking about her," she said, her voice trembling, "and I can't stop wondering if this has happened before." David, for his part, maintained his innocence, pleading with the world to see him not as a suspect, but as a man desperate to find his wife. Yet each denial seemed to raise more questions than answers. Why hadn't he pushed harder for justice after Evelyn's death? Why did he keep parts of his past so carefully guarded? And why, when asked directly, did he avoid meeting the eyes of those questioning him? As the investigation pressed on, one truth became painfully clear. History doesn't always repeat itself, but when it does, it leaves scars that run deep. Could David Holloway be living proof of that adage? Or is he too a victim of cruel coincidence, caught in a web spun by forces beyond his control? For now, the pieces don't fit together neatly, but as the shadows of the past creep closer to the present, one thing is certain: the truth isn't buried, it's waiting. Was this a pattern, or just a terrible coincidence? The question hung in the air like an unsolved riddle, lingering over every conversation, every news report, every whispered theory. It was the kind of question that gnawed at the edges of logic, refusing to settle into clarity no matter how hard one tried to make sense of it. On the surface, the parallels between Evelyn's death and Sarah's disappearance were chilling. Two wives, both brilliant, both beloved, gone under circumstances cloaked in mystery. A man at the center whose charm and wealth seemed almost too perfect, as if designed to deflect scrutiny. And yet, could it all be chalked up to chance? To fate dealing David Holloway an unimaginably cruel hand twice in his life? Some believed it was possible. After all, tragedy doesn't discriminate. It strikes where it will, leaving devastation in its wake without rhyme or reason. Perhaps David truly was a victim of extraordinary bad luck, a man who had loved and lost not once but twice in ways that defied comprehension. Others weren't so sure. Patterns rarely form by accident, they argued. If you look closely enough, connections emerge, even in places where none seem to exist. Was it mere coincidence that both women vanished under questionable circumstances? That neither case offered clear answers? That David always seemed to walk away unscathed, his life disrupted but never destroyed? As investigators dug deeper, they began retracing old steps, revisiting witnesses from Evelyn's time, searching for threads that might tie the two stories together. They pored over financial records, phone logs, even social media posts, anything that might reveal inconsistencies or hidden motives. But the more they searched, the murkier the waters became. And then there was Sarah's diary entry. "He's hiding something. I feel it." Those words took on new weight when viewed through the lens of David's past. Had Sarah sensed the same unease that Evelyn reportedly felt before her death? Was she trying to warn herself? Or someone else? For David, the mounting scrutiny felt suffocating. He insisted he was innocent, a man caught in a nightmare he couldn't escape. "I've already lost one wife," he said during a rare television appearance, his voice breaking. "Do you think I'd risk losing another? Do you really believe I'm capable of such evil?" Yet belief is a tricky thing. It bends and shifts depending on the evidence, or lack thereof. Without definitive proof, the world remained divided. Some saw a grieving husband desperate for closure. Others saw a man whose polished facade hid cracks too deep to mend. So the question lingers still: pattern or coincidence? Only the truth can answer that. And until it surfaces, from the depths of the sea, the shadows of the past, or the recesses of David's guarded mind, the mystery remains unresolved. One thing is certain, though. History has a way of repeating itself, if we let it. Just when it seemed the case couldn't grow more tangled, a bombshell revelation emerged, a twist so startling it rewrote everything we thought we knew. A man came forward, not just any man, but a private investigator named Marcus Reed. According to him, Sarah Lynn had reached out weeks before her wedding, not for help planning her future, but for protection from what she feared might be her undoing. She was scared, Marcus recounted in a hushed tone during his interview with authorities. She believed David Holloway wasn't who he claimed to be. She said there were things about him that didn't add up. According to Marcus, Sarah had grown increasingly uneasy as their wedding date approached. Her doubts weren't fleeting or vague. They were specific, grounded in details she hadn't shared publicly. Details she feared could put her life at risk. But here's where the story took an even darker turn. Sarah wasn't planning to stay silent. She had a plan, one born of desperation and determination. She intended to stage her own disappearance during the honeymoon, using the luxury yacht as both her escape route and her stage. From there, she would resurface with evidence she hoped would expose David once and for all. It was a bold gamble, one that required nerves of steel and meticulous preparation. But if Marcus was telling the truth, then Sarah's vanishing act wasn't a crime. It was a calculated move designed to uncover something far bigger than herself. The implication sent shockwaves through the investigation. If Sarah had faked her disappearance, did that mean she was still alive? Or had her plan gone horribly wrong, leaving her trapped, or worse, at the hands of the very person she sought to expose? For David, this new development was both a lifeline and a noose. On one hand, it offered a plausible explanation for Sarah's absence, one that absolved him of direct involvement. On the other, it painted him as the central figure in a conspiracy Sarah felt compelled to unravel. "She never mentioned any of this to me," David told reporters, his voice trembling with frustration. "How could she think I'm dangerous? I loved her." Yet skepticism lingered. Why had Sarah chosen secrecy over confrontation? What evidence had she uncovered that terrified her enough to orchestrate such an elaborate ruse? And most importantly, where was she now? As investigators scrambled to verify Marcus's claims, they uncovered fragments that seemed to support his story. A burner phone registered under a fake name traced back to Sarah. Cryptic emails sent to Marcus detailing contingency plans. Even a hastily written note found hidden in her luggage. "If something happens to me, look closer. Trust no one. Star." The pieces fit together like shards of glass, sharp, jagged, and refracting light in unexpected ways. Sarah wasn't merely a victim. She was a woman who saw danger coming and fought back in the only way she knew how. But the question remains, did her plan work? Or did it lead her straight into the abyss she was trying to escape? One thing is certain, the deeper we dig, the murkier the truth becomes. And sometimes the answers we seek are buried beneath layers of deception, including our own. Working in the shadows, authorities devised a plan as bold and risky as Sarah's own. If David Holloway was hiding something, if he truly had secrets worth protecting, then it was time to draw them into the light. And what better way to do that than by exploiting his greatest weakness? Trust. The operation began with a name whispered in hushed tones among those who knew David best. A rumored mistress, a woman whose existence had been hinted at but never proven. To the world, David was a grieving husband searching for answers. But whispers told another story. Late-night calls, secretive meetings, and a life far less transparent than he let on. Authorities reached out to her under strict confidentiality, appealing not just to her sense of justice, but to her survival instincts. "If you know anything," they urged, "now is the time to speak up." And she did. What followed was a carefully orchestrated sting operation. Using the mistress as bait, investigators arranged a private meeting with David, a conversation designed to feel intimate, yet entirely controlled. Every word would be recorded, every movement monitored. What emerged from that encounter wasn't just damning, it was horrifying. David arrived calm, composed, even charming, but beneath the polished exterior lay a man unraveling at the seams. As the conversation unfolded, cracks began to show. At first, he denied any wrongdoing, brushing off accusations with practiced ease. But when pressed about Sarah's disappearance and Evelyn's death before her, his demeanor shifted. His tone hardened. His words grew clipped, almost menacing. "You don't understand what I've done for her," he snapped, his voice low but laced with venom. "Everything I built, everything I gave her." Then came the chilling confession no one expected or wanted to hear. In a moment of anger, David admitted to knowing more than he'd let on about Sarah's fears. He didn't deny her suspicions. Instead, he dismissed them as paranoia. "She thought I was dangerous," he sneered. "She had no idea how close she came to being right." But the horror didn't stop there. When confronted with evidence of Sarah's plan, the burner phone, the encrypted messages, the diary entry, he reacted not with shock or denial, but with cold calculation. "If she wanted to play games," he muttered almost to himself, "then maybe she got exactly what she deserved." The room went silent. Even the investigators listening remotely felt the weight of his words settle like ice in their veins. This wasn't grief. This wasn't innocence. It was something darker, uglier, a glimpse into the mind of a man capable of far more than anyone dared imagine. When the recording ended, the pieces finally clicked into place. Sarah hadn't simply feared David. She had known him, known his capacity for manipulation, control, and perhaps worse. Her plan to disappear hadn't been paranoia. It had been survival. For the authorities, the sting operation was both a breakthrough and a reckoning. They now had the evidence needed to bring David Holloway to justice. But at what cost? Because while they may have uncovered the truth, the question remained, where was Sarah Lynn? Had her plan worked too well, leaving her stranded somewhere beyond reach? Or had David found out and silenced her forever? One thing was certain, the nightmare wasn't over. Not yet. Because sometimes the most horrifying truths are the ones we can't undo. The recording revealed the darkest corners of David Holloway's mind, but it was his confession that left investigators reeling. Under pressure, he finally cracked, spilling details so chilling they bordered on unthinkable. David admitted to planning Sarah's disappearance, and not in the way anyone could have imagined. His scheme was methodical, cold-blooded, and horrifyingly simple. He intended to drug her aboard the yacht, stage an accidental fall overboard, and let the ocean do the rest. To the world, it would look like a tragic mishap, a devastating loss during what should have been the happiest time of their lives. No questions asked, no suspicions raised. But here's where the story took its most shocking turn. David believed Sarah was already dead. In his twisted logic, he assumed she had taken her plan too far, that her staged disappearance had somehow spiraled out of control. Perhaps she'd underestimated the sea. Perhaps someone else had intervened. Whatever the reason, David convinced himself she was gone for good, leaving him free to cover his tracks without consequence. What he didn't know, what no one could have predicted, was this. Sarah Lynn was very much alive. Hidden away under an alias, Sarah had executed her plan with precision. Using the private investigator's resources, she had slipped off the yacht unnoticed, leaving behind just enough evidence to implicate David if anything happened to her. The scarf washed ashore, a decoy, the erased security footage, a deliberate move by someone on board paid to muddy the waters. Even the diary entry, "He's hiding something, I feel it," had been planted as a breadcrumb trail leading straight to him. Now safe but far from unscathed, Sarah listened as news of David's arrest spread. She knew the risks she'd taken had paid off, but at a cost. Living in secrecy, cut off from everyone she loved, had exacted a toll she couldn't yet fully comprehend. Yet there was also relief, a quiet vindication in knowing she trusted her instincts when it mattered most. For investigators, Sarah's survival was both a triumph and a reckoning. They had solved the mystery of her disappearance, but the scars of David's betrayal ran deep, not just for Sarah, but for all who had been drawn into his web of lies. And as for David, he now faced justice not only for what he had planned to do, but for the lives he had already destroyed. Evelyn's death, once dismissed as an accident, came back into focus. New evidence suggested foul play, and this time there would be no escape. The nightmare was finally coming to an end. But for Sarah Lynn, the road ahead would be long. Rebuilding her life wouldn't be easy, not after everything she'd endured. Still, one truth remained clear. She had survived. Against all odds, against every calculation, she had outwitted the man who thought he could control her fate. Because sometimes the most dangerous game isn't about power or control, it's about survival. And Sarah Lynn had proven herself more than capable of winning. Weeks later, the courtroom fell silent as a figure stepped forward. A woman whose face had been unseen for months, her name synonymous with mystery and tragedy. It was Sarah Lynn, alive, unbroken, and ready to confront the man who had tried to erase her. Hidden in protective custody since her disappearance, Sarah had watched from the shadows as the investigation unfolded. She saw the media circus, the whispers of guilt and innocence, the unraveling of David Holloway's carefully constructed facade. But she said nothing, not until now. Now it was her time to speak. The world held its breath as she entered the room, flanked by security but walking with quiet resolve. Gone was the elegant art curator who once graced magazine covers. In her place stood someone stronger, sharper, forged by fire. Her eyes locked onto David's, unflinching, as if daring him to look away. "I'm not a victim," she began, her voice steady but charged with emotion. "I'm a survivor." What followed was a testimony that left no room for doubt. Sarah recounted every detail, the growing unease in her marriage, the secrets she uncovered about David's past, and the plan she devised to expose him without becoming another statistic. She described the night she slipped away from the yacht, leaving behind clues like breadcrumbs for investigators to follow. And she revealed the anguish of living in hiding, cut off from friends, family, and everything familiar, all while watching David spin lies to protect himself. "He thought I was dead," she said, her gaze never wavering. "But I'm here, and I'm not afraid anymore." The courtroom erupted into murmurs, cameras flashing wildly as reporters scrambled to capture the moment. Outside, crowds gathered around televisions and smartphones, stunned by the revelation. For months they had speculated, debated, theorized, but no one saw this coming. No one imagined Sarah Lynn would emerge not as a tragic figure, but as a woman who had outwitted one of the most powerful men in the country. For David, the sight of Sarah standing before him was devastating. His mask of charm and composure shattered completely, replaced by raw panic. As her words sank in, he slumped in his seat, defeated, not by the system, but by the woman he underestimated. When the verdict came down, it was swift and unequivocal. Guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and charges reopened in the death of Evelyn Holloway. The man who once seemed untouchable was sentenced to life in prison without parole. As Sarah left the courthouse that day, surrounded by those she trusted most, the weight of the ordeal still lingered. But so did something else: hope. Hope that she could rebuild her life, free from fear. Hope that justice, though delayed, had finally been served. And through it all, one truth echoed louder than any headline or whispered rumor. Sometimes the strongest weapon isn't power or wealth, it's courage. Sarah Lynn had proven that. Against all odds, she had turned her nightmare into a reckoning. And in doing so, she reminded us all that even in the darkest moments, survival is possible. The sea may keep its secrets, but Sarah Lynn kept hers best of all. She had outplayed a killer and lived to tell the tale. Sarah Lynn didn't just survive, she triumphed. In a world that often mistakes wealth and power for invincibility, she proved that intelligence, resilience, and sheer will can topple even the most formidable opponent. David Holloway, a man who believed himself untouchable, had been undone not by luck or chance, but by the woman he sought to destroy. The courtroom verdict was decisive: guilty on all counts, conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and in light of new evidence, charges reopened in the death of Evelyn Holloway sealed his fate once and for all. The judge's gavel struck with finality as David was sentenced to life in prison without parole. No second chances, no escape. As the reality sank in, David's carefully constructed empire crumbled around him. His name, once synonymous with success and philanthropy, became a cautionary tale, a reminder that behind every polished facade lies the potential for darkness. Reporters dissected his rise and fall, pundits debated what warning signs were missed, and true crime enthusiasts added his story to their archives of hubris meeting justice. But this wasn't just another sensational headline. It was personal, for Sarah, for Evelyn, for everyone touched by the ripples of his actions. For Sarah, though, it was more than vindication. It was closure. Closure not just for herself, but for Evelyn, whose memory could finally rest alongside the truth. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed like strobe lights as Sarah emerged into the sunlight, flanked by her private investigator in a small circle of trusted allies. She paused briefly, shielding her eyes from the glare, before addressing the crowd, not with anger, but with quiet strength. "This isn't about revenge," she said, her voice soft, yet resolute. "It's about justice. For me, for Evelyn, and for anyone who ever doubted they could fight back." Her words hung in the air, carried by winds of change. This wasn't just the end of a trial, it was a reckoning, a testament to the power of courage over fear, of truth over deception, of survival over despair. And while the scars of her ordeal would always remain, Sarah walked away unburdened by the weight of secrets. She had faced the abyss and stared it down, refusing to let it claim her. Her life ahead wouldn't be easy. Rebuilding takes time, but she stepped into it unafraid, armed with the knowledge that she had survived something unimaginable. David Holloway would spend the rest of his days behind bars, haunted by the ghosts of his past and the woman who outwitted him at every turn. But Sarah, she moved forward, free at last. Because sometimes the greatest victories aren't won with weapons or wealth. They're won with the unshakable belief that no matter how deep the darkness, the light can still prevail. And Sarah Lynn, she was living proof. And then, just as the world thought they'd finally uncovered every layer of Sarah Lynn's story, she disappeared again. But this time it wasn't out of fear or necessity. It was by choice. In the weeks following David Holloway's sentencing, Sarah retreated from the public eye, not with a dramatic exit, but quietly, deliberately. Cameras stopped flashing outside her safe house. Reporters camped on her doorstep found no trace of her. Even those closest to her received only brief messages. "I'm safe. I need to start over." Star. For someone who had spent months in hiding, survival had become second nature. But freedom meant something different now. Freedom meant reclaiming herself, far away from the glare of headlines and the weight of expectations. She didn't owe anyone an explanation, not after everything she'd endured. Speculation swirled once more, of course. Some wondered if she'd left the country entirely, starting fresh under yet another identity. Others believed she'd returned to art, immersing herself in the quiet solace of curation and creation, where beauty could heal wounds words never could. A few conspiracy theorists even suggested she might one day resurface with a memoir, or perhaps a documentary exposing the darker corners of privilege and power. But none of that mattered to Sarah. She had fought for more than justice. She had fought for her life. And having won both, she chose not to live under society's microscope. Instead, she vanished into the kind of anonymity most people can only dream of. A life untracked, uninterrupted, untethered. It was fitting in a way. From the beginning, Sarah had been 2 steps ahead of everyone, including David Holloway. While he played games of control and manipulation, she mastered the ultimate move, choosing when to step off the board entirely. The irony wasn't lost on those who followed her story. Here was a woman whose face had graced magazine covers and courtroom sketches alike, celebrated as both victim and victor. Yet ultimately, she rejected the narrative thrust upon her. She wasn't content to be defined by tragedy or triumph. She simply wanted peace. Somewhere out there, in a small coastal town perhaps, or tucked away in a bustling city, Sarah Lynn is living her life on her own terms. Maybe she paints sunsets, maybe she writes poetry, or maybe she sits by the sea, listening to waves crash against the shore, remembering how close she came to being swallowed by them, and how fiercely she fought to stay afloat. Because sometimes disappearing doesn't mean defeat. Sometimes it means victory. And Sarah Lynn, she knows better than anyone. The strongest endings are the ones we write ourselves. No one knows where she lives now. Some say Sarah Lynn moved to Europe, trading the sun-drenched shores of California for cobblestone streets and quiet cafes in a place where no one recognizes her name. Others believe she changed her identity entirely, slipping into a new life as seamlessly as she once slipped away from the yacht that fateful night. There are whispers, too, rumors of a gallery opening in Prague, or an art exhibit in Florence curated by a mysterious woman who bears a striking resemblance to her. But none of it can be confirmed, because Sarah doesn't want to be found. Not this time. Not anymore. She's earned her solitude, her second chance. And whatever life she leads now, it belongs solely to her. One thing, however, is clear. She didn't vanish to escape love. Love had been real once, the kind that made headlines, inspired envy, and promised forever. But beneath its glittering surface lurked something darker, more dangerous. Love, when twisted, can become a weapon, a cage, a lie wrapped in silk threads. Sarah vanished to survive it. Her story serves as both a warning and a testament, a reminder that even in the most idyllic settings, shadows can creep in unnoticed. That wealth and charm often mask cracks deep enough to swallow someone whole. And that survival isn't just about outrunning danger. It's about outsmarting it, outlasting it, refusing to let it define you. For months, the world watched as Sarah Lynn transformed from victim to victor, from hunted to hunter. Her courage became a beacon for anyone who has ever felt trapped, silenced, or underestimated. She proved that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet determination to keep moving forward, no matter how heavy the burden. Today, the sea remains vast and unknowable, a fitting metaphor for the mystery of Sarah's current life. Somewhere beyond the cameras, the reporters, and the endless speculation, she breathes freely. She laughs without fear. She creates, loves, and dreams on her own terms. And though we may never know her name or face again, we do know this. The woman who vanished did so not because she was broken, but because she was whole. Because surviving isn't just about staying alive, it's about reclaiming your soul. And Sarah Lynn, she got hers back. Now she's free.